about, but I can't wait to hear. So I want to thank everyone for coming out on a Sunday in June on a full moon to come and see. There he is, Brother Peter Moon. Give him a big hand. All right, so you.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here. I'm going to pass around a couple of my recent newsletters. I have a subscription newsletter, and I'm going to pass around. I hope I have enough copies for everybody. I got the yellow one, which is recent, and the gold one, which is a little older. But try and make sure everybody gets at least one newsletter. Just start passing these around. Okay, great. Give me one. Yeah, that's a good idea. You take that. All right. Okay, so as he said, as Greg said, my name is Peter Moon, and I've been writing for about 18 years. And 18 years ago, I got my license to begin as a writer when I discovered something called the Montauk Project, which was a story which we can call an urban legend that was being generated by Preston Nichols, a scientist who had been involved in secret experiments on the eastern end of Long Island at Montauk Point. And he had incredible stories of mind control and experimentation with psychic energies that was parlayed into manipulation of time itself. These experiments are very exotic, they're very esoteric, and as they say, they remain an urban legend. However, there is substantial tentacles to what happened to establish that a Montauk Project of some form did take place during the 70s and early 80s. And as I begin, I could spend a whole long time talking about the details of the Montauk Project, where it led, how it led, because we're dealing with actually manipulating time and space and stories of time travel, which are quite fantastic. And I'm not going to linger on these subjects today, but that book catapulted me from an unknown person to instant recognition on what you would call the conspiracy circuit that was quite large in the early 90s. And as I began to I'm going to explain how the discovery and learning about time travel led me to connections with the indigenous Moorish or African community. Because when I began to try and study the Montauk Project to see if it actually took place, I discovered that the data trail was all shredded, because of course we're dealing with top military intelligence region. But what I did find, I began to have incredible experiences of synchronicity or coincidence. And coincidence is a phenomena of two things. When you get into the quantum realm, quantum meaning the underpinning of the physical plane, physical matter. When you get into the quantum realm, you begin to experience synchronicity. There was a scientist named Wolfgang Pauli who discovered the initial theories of quantum mechanics. And he was known to have weird coincidences happen around him that were called the Pauli effect. He teamed with a man named Carl Jung, who was a famous psychologist who rivaled and was sort of the antagonist of Sigmund Freud. And Carl Jung was very much into the occult and metaphysics. And he was a counselor of Wolfgang Pauli, and they worked together. And Jung points out the second important facet of synchronicity. As they say, it occurs when you begin to get into the quantum realm or penetrate the quantum realm of consciousness. Jung said that synchronicity, and he's the one that coined the word in the English language, which does still not appear in the dictionary. Carl Jung said, even though he was German and he spoke English, he said that synchronicity was a poor substitute for what happens, as a word, as a poor substitute for what happens when you encounter the Tao. The T-A-O, or the Chinese sometimes spell it D-A-O, but it's pronounced Tao, which is the eternal way of the universe. I will get back to the Tao later on in the talk, but as you penetrate the eternal mystery of the universe, which is the Chinese call the Tao, well, it's obviously related to quantum mechanics, and I began to penetrate this through research of an alleged time travel project. Now, what happened is I began to have many coincidences with certain occult realms, and one of the occult realms was the names Wilson and Cameron, who were very notorious occult families, although they're not famous to any significant extent, save for a man who was the head of the American Psychiatric Association during the 50s, Ewan Cameron. He was known as a butcher of people. He would, do lobotomies. He would shock people. He was a vicious, vicious man. And he was later recognized for doing these things, and an out-of-court settlement was made with a institute in Canada, the Allen Memorial Institute, where he worked out of with victims. But it was all done in Canada. It was done, the CIA had their MK Ultra experiments where they were mind controlling people. Now it just so happens that one of the most, what would you say, effective psychics in the Montauk Project was a guy named Duncan Cameron, who was, I guess his father was the cousin of Ewan Cameron. So there was this very sinister mind control connection between the Camerons and the Montauk Project and mind control. Now, I found out many synchronicities with this name Cameron, which eventually led me to a meeting with a very remarkable woman named Marjorie Cameron, who was part of a magical experiment that was conducted with her, a man you've heard of named L. Ron Hubbard, who was to be the future founder of Scientology, and Jack Parsons, who was a rocket scientist who helped found the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, and he also devised the method by which we have the solid fuel rocket. Jack Parsons is most responsible for getting us to the moon and the space program, because he developed the solid fuel rocket, which means you're using asphalt, which is a slow burn, as opposed to a fast burn. And as you get a long, slow, sustained burn, you can sort of take off as a rocket and get up and penetrate the atmosphere. So Jack Parsons was also an occultist. Now, because I was tracing occult synchronicities, I happened to, when I released my first book, The Montauk Project, I went to the book fair in Anaheim, California, where I was, by mysterious circumstances, led to a man who would introduce me to Marjorie Cameron on that trip, and I would meet her. And she was a very pivotal person in my research, because when I discovered her, I said, why did I follow this occult trail to meet you? And I told her about all my synchronicities with the name Wilson and Cameron, and she said, well, although my name is Cameron, I'm really a Wilson. My father was really a Wilson, and I was adopted and raised by my uncle, who was a Cameron. They just call me Cameron. They would call me that in the Navy. That my name stuck. It's basically known as Cameron. And she says, I became in this experiment, they wanted to incarnate the goddess Babylon. And she was a representative of the feminine energy. And what they were trying to do in this occult experiment, which most people equate to devil worship, was to reintroduce the feminine current into this culture, which Jack Parsons had believed that the Catholic Church and other such institutions were abusing their power through patriarchy. So he was trying to do this magical experiment which would bring back the goddess Babylon, who was not viewed in the biblical sense, but viewed as somebody who would bring back the feminine current and balance the energies of the earth in what we now call this New Age phenomenon. So, by circumstance, if not coincidence, in the 1970s, I worked for L. Ron Hubbard. When I was 19, I graduated high school. I got involved with a local Scientology center in Davis, California, which was primarily a university town. And I had wonderful experiences in Scientology at that particular time, which was structured and run much differently than it is today. And in that center in Davis, I was learning about metaphysics, but I had been primarily interested in sports up to that time in my life. And I only had intellectualism forced on me in living in a university town and going to school with intelligent people. And I had a good mind, but I had to take a learning step to actually improve my intellect. And then I got involved in spiritual matters, mostly through science fiction. But I still thought I was just like a meathead, you know, somebody walking around in a body, because that's kind of what you're growing up to expect to be, at least in the, you know, Southern California culture where I grew up. So in Scientology, I began to learn that I was a spirit, and I actually had the phenomena of what they now call an out-of-body experience. Back then, and they still do, they call it exteriorization, where you're going outside of your body. And that was a very wonderful experience where I was actually able to lift over my head and look down. And that set me on a course that this told me that the procedures of Scientology really worked, because I've been practicing them to relieve, I guess what you call psychosomatic ills, headaches, sore throats that were psychosomatic in nature, and I had great results with this stuff. And I would help others with this as well. So I joined their most elite organization, which was called the Sea Organization, and I did not expect this. I did not request this. But after being in that organization for about a month, which was a very, I guess what you'd call tough organization. It was like sort of like a spiritual boot camp, because you were occupied most of the time, or you were studying. And it was meant to be tough. And after being in there about a month, and I thought I was performing very horribly, and I could substantiate that for you if we had time for the detail. I was not doing that well, but because I had, I guess, good test scores and whatnot, and didn't have a criminal background and a heavy drug background, they decided to send me to their elite ship, which is where L. Ron Hubbard was, and it was called the Apollo. And this is very interesting because they don't tell you where the ship is. You can kind of assume it's in the Mediterranean because you've read news stories where he's coasting around the Mediterranean. So I'm flown over with instructions to report to Madrid, Spain at a certain address, and I'm met at the airport where I spend the night, and they say, do you know, guess where you're going? I said, I have no idea. The Mediterranean, they say, no, you're going to Morocco. You're going to Casablanca. And Morocco would of course later play into my connection to Africa, because I'm going to, you know, what is it, Casablanca, and you're not, obviously Casablanca is a completely different culture to anything we experience here, with women wearing their veils, and it's rather, you know, you're told not to look conspicuous, you're wearing Western clothes, don't stand out, don't make trouble, just shut up and, you know, get to the ship. And it did not look like a safe place to be, certainly, as you go through on the bus. But I arrived at the ship, and that becomes a career for me. And of course, eventually working for L. Ron Hubbard in his office. And of course, the interesting thing about L. Ron Hubbard was that he had devised this procedures, which was called technology, to free the human spirit. Now, of course, if you have something that is purported to be is either as good or is purported to be as good, you're going to have a lot of what I would call mysterious spiritual forces, which we can call jinn, that are there to stop you from getting that. So you had a lot of creepy, crawly people that were there trying to stop you or stop others from doing what we all might consider to be the right thing. So it was constantly being tested. And of course, he had an infrastructure around him, so he didn't have to put up with this stuff. At the same time, when I'd been there a few months, he was devising, he had a procedure of interrogation, which would make all of this waterboarding completely nonsensical, because you could use what they call an e-meter, which is a biofeedback device to determine if somebody's lying or even determine where somebody is. You can find, even if they're not telling you the truth, you can use this. And he had worked out a way so that the Moroccan security force could scrutinize people that were coming to work for the government. What L. Ron Hubbard and his people did not know, that the head of the Moroccan security force, whose name was Colonel Alf Kior, was trying to take over the government. He had a plot to assassinate the King of Morocco. And the King of Morocco, King Hassan II, he was in an airplane, and these two jet fighters from his own air force tried to shoot him down. And they penetrated the plane, and he went down. He just ducked, and he says, tell the pilot the king is dead. And the pilot radioed to the jet fighter, said, the king is dead, don't worry, you got it. Just let me land. So they said, okay. The king had fooled him. And when the king landed, he had this Colonel Alf Kior arrested and murdered. You know, Colonel Alf Kior was not a good guy. And the Church of Scientology, it had a different corporate name. They weren't known as the Scientologists, were in bed with Colonel Alf Kior. They did not want to kill the king. But they became a pariah when everything was discovered and they had to get the hell out of Morocco. And it was very exciting times. I was very new to the organization at this point. And as coincidence would have it, and I was telling Greg, we have a planetary healing group that meets once a month in Oceanside, and the girl where her house is held, she happens to have a roommate who was Colonel Alf Kior's secretary. She was I said, oh, I was in Morocco. She's Moroccan. And she says, oh, I was arrested. I remember that. I remember the Scientologists. So she's become a friend of mine and has invited me over to Morocco, which I'd love to go. I just don't know how I will swing it. But so, as I went to Morocco, and the only places I ever went in Morocco were Casablanca and Tangier, which is to the north across the Straits of Gibraltar. And I always thought, why am I going to Morocco? What's the significance here? And I only went off on, a Liberty Day, which you would take, only one day in Tangier. I went to a place called Robinson's Beach off Tangier, and as we're going to find some waves to body surf, and as on the way there, it's about 40 minutes outside of town, you're taking a taxi, and as the taxi would wheel its way on this road, you'd see these people walking with all their worldly possessions. And I said, who are these people? They're not the Arabs. Their skin was white. They were Caucasian. I said, who are these people? One lady reminded me of the Virgin Mary. She was on a dome, They were kind of a cute people. But I said, who the hell are they? I've never heard of these people. And they would later play into my synchronicities in this new book I just released, Montauk Synchronicity. They were the Berber people. And although my name is Peter Moon, and you know me as Peter Moon, it's a pen name I've adopted and I use. My real name, which was my given name, was Vince Barbaric, which came from Berberish, which my parents never knew this or told me this, but it comes from the Berber people. So, as I would learn, I might have more African heritage than a lot of black people who aren't even from Africa. They might be from America, you see? So, it gave me but I wouldn't find this out for years. Because my mother was Celtic, where my father was from Croatia and Italy. So my mother had another connection, because the Celtic people come from, or pass by way of Northern Africa, because they have the same, I guess what you say, genetic characteristics. And they all come from all of these Moorish, Berber people come from a blue race. We'll get to that later. So anyway, I was spending time, I had this experience in Scientology, which had led me right to Morocco, which was just kind of a stopping post for a few months of my life. And when we left Morocco, and when we left Morocco, it was very exciting. It was like the CIA was spreading all sorts of rumors, and we're trying to get Scientology out of Morocco because they didn't want Scientology to have, they hated Scientology. And the US government was always gunning for you. And then we had, the Mossad was very active in Moroccan politics. Morocco was a big ally of the Mossad, the Jewish intelligence force. And the Mossad and the CIA had trained Colonel Alfgur, who was doing all this miserable stuff to the king, who was able to live as a long time for the king of Morocco. Now, so I guess I was in Scientology for about 12 years, and in 1983 I left because the organization had been taken over by the government in a very systematic way I've delineated in my book, Montauk Book of the Dead. And the Montauk Book of the Dead is a very interesting, it's kind of my life story, because I've written all these books, but I wrote the Montauk Book of the Dead because I didn't mean it to come out this way. And I will now go explain into the genesis of these. See, these two books were supposed to be one book. But if they were one book, this is kind of a thick book, you know. It's not good economically to produce it. Maybe it worked for you. But, you know, it would have taken me. It took me, like, I think 12 years to write this book. Okay? This one took about a year. But the reason it became two books, and I will go back into this whole Scientology experience. When I mentioned that I had left my body. And then when I got involved, and I never forgot that experience, and of course there were many subsequent experiences, but before I left Scientology, what I realized, if you spend so much time out of your body, you're not going to be here. You might forget to change the oil to your car. You might have a mishap. You might forget to brush your teeth and have teeth problems. I mean, if you're focusing not on the here and now. And because I'm a Capricorn, I said, I want to focus on the here and now. I want to pay attention to physical reality. And I left the Church of Scientology to go be a part of society. Because there's a tarot card called The World. And you can be cloistered in a religious environment. And there's a book by Herman Hesse called Magister Ludi, or the Glass Bead Game, which kind of gives the same syndrome. If you're in a secluded, cloistered, esoteric atmosphere, at some point you have to go out and face the world. Otherwise, you're just going to be a cloistered, you know, monk, nun, priest, you know what they get into. You're not functional in the world. So I said, I remembered that tarot card, even though I didn't study the tarot. I said, it's time to go. And I left, got involved in the Montauk Project, and then there was something very, very funny that happened as I began to study the Montauk Project and the Philadelphia Experiment. There were a couple of movies that came out about the Philadelphia Experiment movie. And I was having dreams of an area in Southern California where my parents lived, in Ventura. And I began to have dreams of the highway, and they were exotic dreams. Now the highway, it's just a highway, it's a pretty part, but my dreams were exaggerating the beauty. So I kept having these dreams, and I thought it was connected to one of these movies in the Philadelphia Experiment, Synchronicity, because it was taken in a town near there. So I attributed it to some weird synchronicity, but I began having the dreams, and I kept having the dreams, until finally I went by that area in the physical universe on a vacation. And as I drove by, I'm mistelling the story. I'm mistelling the story. I have to digress or reinvent my story. I'm going to go back to this point. It's not going to have as much meaning. In the pursuit of these synchronicities, I discovered in a book called The History of Long Island, which became my book, The Pyramids of Montauk. And I'm going to pass around this book. It also appears in the Pyramids of Montauk. I discovered a book by Rufus Wilson. The name Wilson was appearing again. I opened the book and I saw this thing. It says, "The Pyramids, Montauk." Okay, I'm discovering there were pyramids in Montauk. I'm going to pass this around so you can all look at the pyramid. And so why are there pyramids at Montauk? There was no explanation in the book why there were pyramids in Montauk. Now, I've just been writing about a time travel research project there. So I asked the librarian, and she took me to a room in the back, a research room, and she allowed me to look in books that were not open to the public, and she said, it said that the Montauk Air Force, where the Montauk Air Force Station is, known as Camp Hero, was once sacred Native American ground. And the family that ruled the Montauks were known as the Pharaohs. These are like the Pharaohs of Egypt. And I said, Pharaohs and pyramids and Montauk, this is bizarre. So I had to write a whole book to explain what were these pyramids doing here? What were these, why was the people named Pharaohs? Now the history books, which were written by white people, said that there were 13 tribes on Long Island, and that the royal family were the Pharaohs, and they lived at Montauk. So Montauk was a royal spot. And I would later learn that Montauk meant the highest of the high, the highest expression of the divinity in their language. And I had some contact with the Montauk Indians, and the matriarch of the Montauk Indians was a woman named Olive Farrow. Now, Olive Farrow was a very nice lady. She had no knowledge of the Montauk Project or even the pyramids, but I had written the book, and after I wrote the book, she says, I want you to mention my son in the second printing, because you didn't mention him. I said, well, I didn't know you had a son. So I mentioned the book, and I sent it to her. And when she got the book, I called her up on the phone to see if she got the book, and she says, she didn't answer. Her sister answered and says, Olive just went to the hospital with a bleeding gallbladder. Olive would never live. She would be in the hospital for a few weeks and die. So then I went back to my research, and I said, oh my God. And I was studying these synchronicities I had with the olive, which I will go into in a little more depth. And it said the olive would be used in the future to heal the gallbladder. She just died of one. But I'd already been on a trail of olives, and I said, oh my God, her name's Olive, and she's sacred to the Pharaohs. But I was put on to the olive by a mysterious friend of mine who showed up at a lecture he was giving one day, and he brought me this picture. He brought me a playbill from 1909 it was called the New Montauk Theater. It was just an ordinary playbill from a long time ago. And I said, why are you giving me this? He says, it's for you. I just saw it, and I knew it was meant for you. And I'm going to show you a picture of it here. This is The Follies of 1909, the Montauk Theater. And I looked at this thing, and because I was very much pursuing occult clues, I couldn't find any clues in it. I studied it for a while, gave it up, and after about a year, I had a man at my house from England, and we were talking about things, and I had Duncan Cameron in my house. He was the psychic in the Montauk Project. I suddenly remembered this playbill, and I said, well, maybe Duncan could give me a psychic read on it, because he's a Cameron. And so I went down, and I'd been sitting on a bottom of papers on my desk upstairs, so I brought it downstairs, and I said, Duncan, here, let me give this to you. And as I gave it to him, the back of the cardboard in the back began to fall off, and I said, there's something underneath. And I pulled it open, and there was a picture of Christ on Mount Olive. And I said, oh my God, what is this? Why is this appearing right here? And Christ on Mount Olive. And it told me that I needed to study what is the Mount of Olives. So I called up my friend who gave it to me, and I said, what is this about? He says, well, you would have discovered this sooner or later. He says that the olives are sacred to the Knights Templar. And the Knights Templar revere the feminine energy. so he says, but see what an olive tree looks like. So I went on a quest to find an olive tree, which I'd never seen in person. And it took me a few months to find one in a library book, because we didn't have the internet in those days. So basically said an olive tree was a connection to the inner earth. They live 800 years. But then I began to study the olive and find out that the olive was sacred to the Christians. They use it for chrism. It was sacred to Muslims, and it was sacred to Jews, who used the oil to light the menorah for 8 days in the temple. And it was also sacred to the Greeks. The Greeks had a contest to see who could give the greatest gift to mankind, and the winner was Athena. She gave mankind the olive. And the loser was Poseidon, who gave mankind the horse, which is the symbol on the Montauk Project, which is a male patriarchal symbol. They revered Athena. So she gave mankind the olive, or the olive tree. They had one on Mount Olympus. Athens was named after Athena. And I was very much into this pursuit of olives. There are many synchronicities I had with olives. It's sacred. And then I discovered through a friend of mine, Mark Roberts, that when he had studied my work, and he says, well, this olive, he says, he sent me some materials from a dowser called Egerton Sykes, who used to write journals on Atlantis. And his work showed that Athena was a name derived from an earlier African queen named Antonia. This is Antonia, whose name was transliterated into Athena. And Athena, Antonia, was a blue goddess from Atlantis. And her people migrated at the end of Atlantis. There was, I guess, priestesses, there were scribes, and the scribes went to Ireland, became the Tuatha De Danann. That's sort of where my mother's family kind of descends from. And the temple priestesses and the warriors went away. Some say they went and became the Vikings. And because there was no temple to guard anymore when Atlantis fell. And the priestesses migrated into Africa, into what is now the Sahara. It was the Triton Sea. It was a beautiful sort of Garden of Eden. And they had a blue queen, okay, a blue queen. And one of my Moorish friends told me the olives symbolize all colors. Because olives come in all colors. They don't come in just black or green. And he said that olive was symbolic of all races. And of course this blue race, which I also wrote in The Black Sun, is indicative of what's called an Rh negative blood type. The blue people, and this book goes into it in quite a bit of detail, how they legendarily descend from Mars. The word Cairo comes from Alkahira, which means Mars. And this book also explains how, see, there's this occult, as I mentioned, occult synchronicities, and there is an infamous occultist named Aleister Crowley who was featuring in a lot of these things, and he channeled a book. He channeled a book called the Book of the Law, which he channeled after going in the pyramid at Cairo. A lot of strange circumstances around it, but the information he channeled in that book was decoded by a friend of mine who's an occultist, where it shows the interrelationship of 5 and 6, okay? But you have to be able to read the code. There's whole secret societies based upon this magician that don't know what they're talking about. They're going off and spinning dark magic and doing irresponsible things and giggling about it, but they didn't know this code that this gentleman I happen to know decoded. And it's all about codes of 5 and 6. And this ties into Cairo because what he said is, it shows the pentagram, which is a 5, and the hexagram, which is a 6. And when you juxtapose them one on top of the other, it's like a male and a female going together, but it also is the structure for the Kabbalistic tree of life, which you've probably all seen. Now when you twist this, it becomes a DNA spiral. It's explained exactly in the book. So in other words, this channeled information through Aleister Crowley, who was a very, what you call, double-agent, double-sided character himself, he was channeling the structure of DNA, if you were so gifted as to be able to interpret it, which he never did interpret it. I didn't interpret it. I had a friend who had a gift for this, who had very strange experiences in his own right. But anyway, the 5-6 is key when we consider chiral, because I found on another website where it explains what's called the 156 ratio, where the capstone of the Great Pyramid is 1/56 the size of the Great Pyramid itself. The capstone is 1/56 size. The capstone is missing. It represents the missing key to consciousness on this planet.
5-6?
I said it's 1/56 the size of the Great Pyramid, the capstone. 150. In other words, if you took this area of the capstone, it would be 1/56 the size of the Great Pyramid itself. The Giza, the Great Pyramid is 1/56 size of the Giza Plateau, which is in turn 1/56 size of the continent of Africa, which is in turn 1/56 the size of the planet Earth. So you see, whoever built this pyramid knew this 5-6 ratio, which was symbolic of this DNA spiral. In other words, they knew they were life. This is a manifestation of a divine inspiration, a divine consciousness that was manifesting itself through this dark magician who was bisexual and a lot more, he called himself the Antichrist, so he was a very dubious character in himself, but he was in the Great Pyramid and spent the night in there with his wife prior to having these revelations come, which actually came through his wife at first. They came through her initially, and she was not a medium or anything like that, but she kind of got in the mood of the pyramid. So that this is really saying is that whoever built that Great Pyramid, it's like a memory storage. And Egypt, of course, I would find out was called the land of the olives. Isis was the queen of the olives. Isis is also portrayed as blue. So it's not really a stretch when you look at all the data to think that it might have been off-planet fertilization from a colony, because according to tradition, Mars had to come here when they began to have their own problems on that planet. And of course, the Rh negative, Rh means rhesus factor, monkey blood. So most people in the world have Rh positive. Most of us have a kinship with the monkeys. I don't even know what my blood type is, so it doesn't matter. If you're Rh negative, you don't have that factor. It means, and of course, all the races can have Rh negative. You can be black, yellow, red, blue, whatever. It doesn't really matter. And of course, I first kind of got interested in this when I had a friend who was black, and he told me that, you know, he'd been over to West Africa where he had an uncle or something, and he said the people would turn purple. They get so much sun, they would actually turn purple when the sun would come out. So you have black people being purple or blue. You have white people, the Celtic people believe they were blue. Tibetans have blue gods. It's a priori function or manifestation. And it goes very deep. It goes very deep because it's embedded in our culture in many respects. The Queen Antonia who we consider Athena, the most sacred building in Athens was the Parthenon. Anybody who hasn't read the book know what Parthenon means. It's a word we've all heard though, but we don't know what it means. It starts from parthenogenesis, which is virgin birth. Athena was a virgin queen. She actually had a virgin birth in mythology. She came out of the head of her father, which was Zeus. He had a headache and she just you know, because she was Minerva also in Rome, the wisdom. She had wisdom, so she came out of the head, which symbolizes a brain operating in full capacity. This virgin goddess. Now, Antonia was a virgin goddess. And because Egypt was settled from the west and she was there, there's also traditions linking why did Mary wear blue all the time? She's always positioned in blue. Mary the Virgin Mother. Now, it's very interesting when we associate Mars with Rome, because Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus. But Romulus and Remus is interesting too, because Remus was the loser in the fight. Romulus killed his brother. Remus represented Romulus was patriarchal, Remus was matriarchal. And of course, Remus was later attributed to Uncle Remus, you know, and it was kind of like a subtle put down.
Well, that's deep right there, that's heavy.
It's very deep.
Yeah.
But it wasn't necessarily purposeful, it wasn't necessarily accidental. And I learned that many of the slave names they gave to people were Roman, they call them Venus. They call, you know, I mean, they give them Roman names. I don't quite understand why they did that.
But I never put that connection with
Uncle Remus.
Uncle Remus and Romulus and Remus. That's interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very deep.
Mm-hmm.
So, remind me to do the Amos and Andy thing too, to talk about how that is that. So, anyway, Romulus and Remus were the product of, they were raised by a she-wolf because they were left on the banks of the river, but their father was the god Mars, according to mythology. Mars, and here we're coming from Mars. And the mother was, what was her name? Rhea Silvia. Rhea Silvia, which is kind of like Rhesus. You know, Rhea was, and Rhea Silvia was the Vestal Virgin. She was the first of the Vestal Virgins. So they had their own sacred temple, they had their own well of souls, just like the Hebrews did, but theirs was underneath the Forum. So this virgin theme is in Rome, it's in Greek, it's in Christianity, which comes much later, and I haven't heard of it in Egypt, but it would come through Antonia. It might exist in Egypt. I'm not. You don't. If it,
you already mentioned.
I mentioned Isis, but do they call
Isis is Marie, which is Aset, which is also born of the virgin birth, and who actually gives birth to the virgin birth, which is the foundation of the Black Madonna.
Okay.
The city of Paris, Par-As, the house of Isis. So the city of Paris in France was founded on the cult of the worship of the Black Madonna, Aset.
Okay, I didn't get that connection. That's good, because I had Paris. I went into Paris, you know, from Troy, which is also but that's very interesting. I appreciate that. So there's a lot of tradition of virgin births, but as I began to study this, I began to correlate something from one of my earlier books, Montauk Revisited, where I was introduced to the concept of a virgin birth. And it's a very interesting story how I even got into it, but I'm going to skip that for brevity today and say, but what I was told by a very good friend of mine who is a very knowledgeable person about occult matters, she says that a virgin birth occurs when the zona pellucida, which is the female egg, is penetrated by a late male protein in the body of the female. And the female, of course, all females have proteins from their father. And when this would penetrate the egg, it would fool the egg into thinking it's a sperm, and it would manifest a child. Now, there was a lot of what you call mumbo-jumbo occultism and procedures that would go with this, but when the birth did not work out properly, and often because you had dark people practicing it, you would have an attenuated virgin birth, which would result in an extra set of nipples. Okay? And you've probably heard of this. They call them, in vulgar expression, witches' tits. And it's not uncommon for somebody to have this, but it's an attenuated baby. And of course, if this would to work out magnificently, it would theoretically be a Christ. But more often, it might be something of a mockery of a Christ, like an Antichrist or a Golem or something like that. So this is a magical doctrine, an occult doctrine, you know, which is better left for people like Rosemary's Baby. It's not a thing that healthy people normally practice because it's too arcane, too occult, and people don't even know what it is. If you're going to take, in mythology, if we include Christianity as mythology, we'd say the most magnificent example in mythology is the Christ. You know, it's a magnificent example. You could say Horus too, but I'm not that schooled in kinetic knowledge to even be making such statements. But we could also say what's the difference. But more to the point is there was this doctrine of a virgin birth, and that I'd been sitting on for over 10 years, and I really couldn't take it any further till I started studying this stuff about Antonia, and I came across through a friend of mine who's a Tantra teacher, and she explained something to me that most people in our culture do not know about, and it's a very interesting thing in the feminine tradition. It's the Taoists and the Tantras, or the Tantrikas, call it moonflower. And moonflower is now recognized in science. It was not recognized until about the 1980s. It's what's called female ejaculatory liquid. And female ejaculatory liquid is an excretion like an ejaculation. It's not a lubrication, it's not a ovum, it's a literal squirt. And in studying it, I found out that it's in pornographic videos where it's called the squirt. It's portrayed very vulgarly, yet it's just for sensationalism. It's really a sacred, part of the female experience. And there was a book in the 1980s, I think it was called The Sensuous Woman, where it brought this into the consciousness. But up until the 1980s, it was denied by science that it even existed. The women can't do that. They can't do it. It doesn't exist. The British Film Board to this day says that it doesn't exist. It's urine. And of course, what does the British Film Board have any business saying anyway?
What did you say, Peter? Was urine?
Yeah, they say it's urine.
Oh.
It's the British Film Board. I mean, where do they get this? This is, an insane sort of thing. Now, 6% of women, statistically, it's said, if you look it up on Wikipedia, female ejaculation, it'll say 6% of women do it. Another 14%, they do it regularly. 14% of women do it willy-nilly here and there, and the rest of the women don't. Okay? It's a lost art of the feminine. Okay? And it has to do with repression of women and what we'd say, even though when the Constitution was written and it said that slaves had 3/5 of a vote, so they didn't really quite have 3/5, but they at least said women didn't have any vote. So that shows that rhetorically, women were thought of less than a slave in terms of voting. In social habits, I don't know if they were, but in terms of who they really are, they probably, on some level, were worse than a slave, on some level, in terms of their inner spiritual being. So this is the repression that we're suffering from. And of course, my friend Marjorie Cameron, that was part of her mission. Welcome, John.
Are all cell phones be on vibrate?
Just a second. But if we don't have cell phones, we won't feel like we're in modern culture. Interrupting.
Now they can vibrate.
Oh, go ahead. Do we want to say something?
Yes. Why weren't women allowed to vote?
Why weren't they?
Yes.
It was part of the Constitution.
We're going to take questions at the end. Hold on a second. We're going to take questions at the end.
Yeah, okay, but what did you say?
The Constitution of what?
The United States.
I don't understand.
The United States did not, the Constitution did not give women a vote.
But there must have been a reason for it.
I can't answer for that. I didn't write it.
Yeah, but let's hold off. Let's hold off onto the questions till.
It's probably a very good question. But
2:30.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was going to say was that I wanted to study the chemical constituents of this stuff, and it gets pretty detailed and complicated But what I found out is this female ejaculatory liquid is essentially the same thing as male sperm. It's not really any different. And this gives us, this not only tells us that it's, of course it's a lost art, and it also says that the chemical constituency of it changes based upon diet, menstruation, other circumstances. So there would have been a whole procedure and ritual to make this work, to where a woman could have her own baby, possibly even conceive by herself. Okay? And this is a scientific plausibility that's more than a plausibility, because it's just missing. People don't know how to do it anymore, except for some strange occultists, which there is this whole secret society is based upon doing it, but they really don't know what they're doing. They're lost. So this is a lost art, but see, this answers so many questions of, people will argue about the virgin birth. Well, could he or could, it's not even a miracle. It's an amazing thing by our standards of today, but it's a natural. So you could say, if we want to adopt the mythology or the religion of Christianity, we could say that that was people that really knew what they were doing. We could say that if we wanted to. It wasn't a miracle in the sense that we normally think of it as a miracle. And this kind of like takes a lot of balloon out of a lot of the untruth that's out there. Now, Queen Antonia was the one who gave the olive tree to Africa, and it eventually migrated to Greece. And she was the purveyor of the olive. Now, what I want to get back to is, I want to go back, fast forward to what I was saying when I was having this dream of these miraculous palm trees and landscapes in Southern California, which were exaggerated. As I went by that area where my parents were buried, I saw a sign that said Adobe Los Olivos, which means House of the Olives. I said, why does the turnoff have an olive house next to my parents? When I got home that night, I told my sister, and she says, that's where Mom and Dad are buried. They're buried on the old branch of the olives. I said, wow, that's heavy. You know, my parents died in 1974, and now they're buried on the land of the olives. Then I began to have dreams of Davis, where I said, why am I having dreams of Davis, where I got into Scientology. And then I realized that where I first left my body was on a place called Olive Drive. I go, oh my goodness, Olive Drive, my parents are buried on the olives, and I was able to handle the death of my parents very well because of what I learned in Scientology. So I ended up having to write this whole book to explain the whole Scientology part of my life, you know, and how it tied in. But the book about the olives and the Moorish connection is right here, which was the book I really wanted to write. But this kind of got in the way, so I had to go into this olive thing had kind of come from outside, but it was the olives in part that drove me to the Moors, to my ancient, and I saw that my mother's family line, by namesake, I can't show the actual lineage, traces down to the Berber people, and then my father, through the namesake, travels down through the Berber people. And as I say, this woman who was the secretary of Colonel Alfred, she says, you are a Berber. I can see it in you. You have the features of the Berber. So it's, and of course my father had a great kinship to the Moors, which he never quite explained. Just that he really respected them and liked them, and used to put my face in it every now and then when I, you know, because he was a student of history. Of course, he didn't know the Moors as many of us know them today. He knew them as the standard diatribe you read about, but he said they were the bringers of knowledge to, you know, astronomy, algebra, and whatnot. He had a great respect for them, and evidently had the Moorish blood himself. Now there's also, I want to touch on the Amos and Andy thing. Now there's something else that's very interesting. There was a space-time project called Ong's Hat that came in New Jersey, southern New Jersey, which is known as the land of the Jersey Moors. And Ong's Hat is an obscure location in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey where there was a experimentation of dissident physicists from Princeton, hippies, Sufis, that claimed to be operating on with somebody from the Moorish Science Temple. Now this is, Ong's Hat is part legend and part truth. But the Moorish Science Temple, I'd never heard of before. But what I did know was there was a character named Peter Lamborn Wilson, there's the name Wilson coming up again, who was a member of the Moorish Orthodox Church. And the Moorish Orthodox Church was tied to Timothy Leary and the Millbrook Institute up in upstate New York. And they were kind of a CIA-affiliated church that was mocking Moorish wisdom. I say mocking. They had a certain amount of tribute to it. But I thought that this was all there was. I didn't know there was a Moorish Science Temple until I wrote this book, Synchronicity of the Seventh Seal, where I was contacted by some Moors who began to fill me in on the Moorish legacy, that it was still alive, that there was a Moorish Science Temple. These people weren't part of it. They didn't like the Moorish Science Temple. They thought that it had become institutionalized. They were Moors and they were operating outside of it. But I wrote the Seventh Seal because as I began to get a lot of, as I'm writing this information, you might say a lot of negative spirits would come to me that didn't want me to do it. Sometimes it would come in the form of media people who were ready to insult me behind my back, not on the air, but stop me from getting media appearances and whatnot. And I had to write this book to extricate myself. It was like an exorcism. And what came out of it was a very strong recognition and identification with the Moors, even though I didn't know there were Moors to any significant extent, other than the Moorish Orthodox Church. And what I discovered, of course, I wrote this book, and they contacted me, and I was flown to Chicago and spoke to some Moors there. It was very wonderful, and in D.C. And one of my friends who's now passed away, Elias Bay, he said this book was his Bible. He carried it around as his Bible. He liked it so much. And because it was recognizing the Moors, but I was coming through it through my research in synchronicity. And one of the interesting things I found out was April Fool's Day was, March 31st, 1492, the Jews were expelled from Spain. And this is just 6 months before Columbus goes to America. And April 1st, they don't talk about it, but what happened on April 1st, according to tradition in Spain, is that they told all the Moors, they said, we've kicked out the Jews, and you're friends of the Jews, you can go. We've got ships waiting for you, you can go back to Morocco. You've lost the war in Spain, but we'll let you go. And so they said, we don't believe you. Well, they saw there were ships waiting for them. So they left. And while they left, in between going to their ships, they burned their houses and burned the ships. So they were homeless. This was on April 1st, 1492. This becomes April Fool's Day. Ha ha ha. You've been fooled. This is a denigration of the Moors, which is by the Catholic Church. And there was the siege of Granada, where they built the town of Santa Fe. Isabella burned down their little huts. They were just doing a stakeout on Granada, because Granada was landlocked, or so to speak, in the mountain. They just waited to starve them out. And they built a little town, burned down. So they built a new town made of stones, and it had a cross, and it was called Santa Fe. And there was the capitulation of Santa Fe, where a treaty was signed. And I haven't seen this treaty, but apparently I'm told it was a capitulation. It was not, the Moors allowed, I can't prove this, but according to my friend Elias Bay, they allowed the Catholic Church or the Spanish government. And when I first heard of Noble Drew Ali, and in connection with this experiment at Ong's Hat, I said, this guy sounds like a mythological character. He had a father who was a slave. He was from North Carolina. His mother died young, as did his father. When he was young, he lived with an aunt who would beat him. He had paranormal abilities. At a young age, he supposedly became a merchant seaman or stowed away and went to Egypt. When he went to Egypt, he ended up amongst a group of masters who recognized him. They saw him. We've been waiting for you. So they initiated him into the Great Pyramid. They took him into the pyramid blindfolded and say, work your way out. Not necessarily expecting the aspirant to live. And when they found him, he got out almost immediately. They were surprised and they found him between the paws of the Sphinx. And the paws of the Sphinx are very symbolic. You know, it's the cradle of knowledge. In many ways I can tell you, which we won't go into. But Noble Drew Ali was sent on a mission back to America, where he was from, to teach the Moorish people their true heritage. And he taught that there were Moors in America before there were what we know as Native American Indians, and that this history has been obscured and robbed. And it's not only robbed the so-called black people, it's robbed the white people. It's robbed everybody, because the knowledge is what's lost, you know. And it's almost, you have humanity enslaving its best, you know, taking the best part of itself and cutting it off. Which is, if you look at human beings in general, you know, if the roles were reversed, they might have done the same thing. You know what I'm saying? It's just like the human condition is such that let's choke off the knowledge. But anyway, that's what happened. And Noble Drew Ali lived in the 1900s and the 20s, and he became very popular. He was very charismatic, very gifted. And Elihu Pleasant Bay wrote this book, Noble Drew Ali. Spent a great deal of his life. He knew one of Noble Drew Ali's wives, because he had more than one wife. And he was very popular in the 20s. And he was so popular, he became quite a problem to the government, because he was lifting the black communities up, and in a way that they weren't used to being lifted up. He wasn't using Christianity. He was using his own brand of Islam. And of course, it was shocking to me as I began to actually read the history, find out that he had a whole FBI file. They were bird-dogging him. And then, out of the, there was a lot of power surrounding him. And he went into the police took him in. They arrested him. They let him go. But he died mysteriously. Now, some people say it was from the police, that he had a police beating, which Elihu Pleasant Bay says that was not true. He just died. And he said the reason that he died was because the burden on the Moorish people was too great. He could do more from outside of the body than inside the body. Insight that he was one of the people influencing my synchronicities from the outside. That was quite a moment, you know, an aha moment. And he has a grave, I believe, in Chicago. I'm not real sure about that, if it's still there or not, but he lived in Chicago at that point. He was from Newark, in earlier North Carolina. But the interesting thing about Noble Drew Ali is that as I began to study him, the whole TV show, first it was a radio show of Amos and Andy, was designed to lampoon Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish Science Temple. Because I don't know how many of you have seen Amos and Andy. I saw it as a kid in the 50s, wasn't really interested in it, didn't like it because the character was always having a hard time. It was always getting the butt end of the joke. I didn't think it was too nice. But what he was, is that the main character was Kingfish.
But it was funny as hell, though. It was a funny show.
Yeah, well, I was too young to get the funny stuff.
Yeah. I started watching later on as time.
Oh, it would be hilarious now.
Yeah.
But I didn't get it. I mean, I was young. I'm just watching this getting the ass end of everything.
Yeah.
So I'm the kid. I don't understand the stereotyping humor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand anything. It was said in the 20s that the black people loved it just as much as the white people. Okay? It was just funny. It was funny. But he was the Kingfish, and he had his Order of the Mystic Knights of the Sea. Now that's the Moors. The Moors were the best sailors.
That was in the show?
Yeah, Order of the Mystic Knights of the Sea. He belonged to the Order of the Mystic Knights of the Sea. And they had, like, you know, the head jellyfish and the head mackerel, and the congregation were called sardines. This is really funny. But they were lampooning the real Moorish Science Temple, which Drew Ali had set up. And they had one episode where they had Ali Bendo, this crystal gazer who was arrested. You see? It was like they were mocking the Moorish Science Temple. Now, what's interesting is about why I said, who was sponsoring this? It turned out to be, I think it was Pepsi. And I found out I studied the whole history of Pepsodent, and the guy, it was very, I put it in the book, it's bizarre, all the connections with Pepsodent, and why it relates to teeth and whatnot. But the Amos and Andy was the first syndicated show in the history of broadcasting. It got syndicated was football. You know, Red Grange and all that, those days in the 20s. Not even baseball had been syndicated at that point. It was Amos and Andy. And it was a Masonic duo that had done this. They were Freemasons, high-level Freemasons, and they created this very funny show, which was so nobody could possibly take Moorish science seriously. And black people in general would be lampooned. And if you even watch the Hollywood movies of those era, and the way black people were portrayed, even beyond the Step and Fetch It, it is just, nobody would do that now, unless they were just making fun of it, you know, Eddie Murphy or somebody. But it's like, you know, it was in such a way that white people could not take a black person seriously. And having grown up in a community where you were told that, my mother said that, no, they don't, I said, why don't black people live here? She said, they steer them away. In other words, they steer them. It was called steering. And it was just, you know, she explained it to me. And the attitudes of the people were such that, no, they weren't to be taken seriously. It was something you didn't talk about too much. But, you know, so, you know, when you make fun of something, and they were making fun of Drew. Now, what's interesting about Noble Drew Ali is that most people don't know that out of his death arose a man called Wally Fard. And Wally Fard has an FBI file and a very obscure lineage. Like, he seems to come from Hawaii. He might have some Polynesian blood in him. He seems to have some white blood in him. He doesn't seem to have any black blood in him. He might, but he doesn't seem to. Yet he becomes the head of this Moorish Science Temple. And then he picks Elijah Muhammad to be the head of the new reorganization, which is the church, what do they call it? Church of Islam? Nation of Islam. Not a church yet. Nation of Islam. So you find, when you find out about the Nation of Islam, they do know that they had Noble Drew Ali as their original founder, but they don't give him much airtime.
Exactly.
And most of the people don't know this. You know, even people in the Nation of Islam. The higher-ups know. And, of course, white people don't know much about the Nation of Islam anyway. They just look at it as antagonistic oil on their side. Most people, not all of them. And, of course, Barack Obama has to know about the Moors because he's from Chicago. And I'm told that even the white people in Chicago know about the Moors because they have a very strong presence in the parades. So there will be some, you know, knowledge of this. And, you know, this is what the Seventh Seal is. I wrote in, and I'm just researching this stuff on my own. I'm not being prompted to do it because my knowledge, my path of synchronicity is leading sort of a tribute to the Moors as this ancient lost knowledge. And then when I wrote the book, I was contacted by Moors through Elias Bay. And I went deeper into some threads in a book called The Spandau Mystery, which is kind of a follow-up to The Black Sun, which is a tribute to Moorish culture, but it's written in a novel form. For those of you who like The Black Sun or The Seventh Seal, that's a follow-up to it. So that is kind of my connections to the Moorish culture. Now, we're going till 3:30?
3:30. 3:30. You want to take question and answers at 3 o'clock?
What I
Or
want to do...
You want to take a break?
You know, we can take a break, we can do questions at the same time. I don't need a break, but I want to touch on this Transylvania book for about the last half hour because it's really interesting. It takes us off in a different direction. So if you want to get up and drink or mosey, I'll just sit here and listen to questions.
All right, we'll be back and take a break, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, and
Is that long enough?
in the meantime, you can ask questions if you want, and we'll
Okay, well, you keep giving.
I have one here.
Oh, you want to take a break?
Could you just elaborate just on a minute? You talked about the RH factor dealing with animal blood and monkey blood. It was
Right.
RH positive and RH negative. One has monkey blood and one doesn't. Can you just a second for clarification for me on that?
Well, the RH factor it has to do with antigens. I don't know if I can give you the correct explanation off the top of my head, but the RH negative blood does not respond to antigens in the same way that RH positive one. I haven't explained in the book. I mean, you can look it up pretty easy. It's just exactly how it, they haven't been able to find in RH negative blood, they don't find this connection to the rhesus monkey. That's why it's called RH negative. It has to do with, I wrote it out specifically in the book.
Which book was that?
The Book of the Living. The Book of the Living. Because, I anticipated your question, but I put it in the writing rather than, I'm not a biologist, I don't always remember this stuff real well, but I cover my bases. It's not unknown. But most doctors, at least when I wrote the first book on it, Black Sun, most doctors did not know that RH negative meant rhesus negative. It's just RH negative. They only study what they have to. And what I do is I move into a realm of occult biology, even with the liquid moonflower I was talking about, where you get on the cutting edge of where biologists don't know what you're talking about, because they're been trained to look at things a certain way. Yes?
Yeah, you demystified the feminine ejaculation process. And the Moorish temple you're speaking of, they speak on a lot of these mysteries as my story. Would you also clarify lycanthropic? I ain't going to bring that up, but would you clarify lycanthropic mystery as my story?
Lycanthropy is werewolf, and of course, this gets into occult biology and the ability of the body to do different things, which is in more elevated spiritual states. And to answer you right now, what I'm kind of studying is the collapsing of the 23rd chromosome, which is known as the sex chromosome, which was theoretically a 24th and a 23rd chromosome, and they collapsed together. And when this collapse happened, we lost our ability to do many things, one of which could theoretically, ostensibly be shapeshifting.
The 24th was shifting. So when it collapsed, you're saying we're not able to no more, or we just lost it?
Well, I guess people are reported to. Now, I'll tell you an interesting story. Through my travels, I met the medicine man of the Montauk Indians, Artie Crippen, and I was with him and a bunch of his friends, Indian friends, and one of them said that they were in a car and they saw a rabbit go across the highway, and when he got across, he turned into a man and walked away. And I said, "Did you see that?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Did the other people in the car see it?" He goes, "Yes, they did." I said, "Were they all natives?" He said, "Yes. They're all natives. They weren't, non-indigenous people." So it suggests, and one of my shaman friends says that the natives of the Montauk Indians see stuff all the time. They just don't talk about it because they don't want to be labeled crazy. And some of you might have that experience too. So, any other questions? While we're on this thread, I mentioned this part of this. As I make my travels, I meet Artie Crippen, the pharaoh of the Montauk Indians. And this is in the Montauk Book of the Living. And what Artie was very interesting because at the age of about 12 or 13, he was on the Shinnecock Reservation. These men from the Lakota Reservation, these two medicine men came to see him. And they wanted to get at this young teenager. And he said, his family was protective of him. He said, well, we've been waiting 30,000 years for him. Our tribe has been waiting 33,000 years for him to incarnate. He's the second coming of the pharaohs. And his family thinks he's nuts. They think they're nuts. And a fight almost breaks out. Which didn't do any good because these guys were boxers. They were trained boxers and stuff like this. But they held their own, and Artie's grandfather, who was a great football player, said, let him talk to him. And they told him, you're this heavy character, you know, we want to know you, we want you. So when he grew up, he went to South Dakota to meet them and work with them. And he began 5 years of preparation for the Sundance. And according to him and according to them, because I met them, he's the only one that's really ever done the Sundance properly. Because it's very excruciating. You're going out there without any food or water, so that they'll let you eat oranges and they'll let you subvert the process. But it takes 5 years of preparation to do it. You know, doing these piercings and whatnot. And when he did it, he went up in this mountain and he was given eagle feathers from the other side. When he came down the mountain with eagle feathers, all the other medicine men who came over from all over the country were jealous. We've been doing this all our whole lives and we haven't gotten eagle feathers. Now you're getting them. Well, he's special. So Artie is a neat character, and I hope that actually, while all the information I talk about is obviously interesting to you people, and it's interesting to me, I have something better for you. And I'm not to put down my own stuff. Is Artie, he grew up, he was 1/4 Shinnecock, 1/4 Montauk. He has special medicine man ability. And we could have him come here, you know, that we could do this too. But as he grew up, Bruce Lee used to come to the Shinnecock Reservation, and he knew Bruce Lee as Uncle Lee, because Artie was always involved in the martial arts. But Artie introduced me to somebody who's far better than Bruce Lee, and that's his teacher, Roosevelt Gainey. So here we get back to the Tao, where Roosevelt is a Taoist priest, and he's part Cherokee Indian, but he's also of, you know, what you call black skin color. He said he has so many relatives, he can't begin to say, you know, what he is and what he isn't. But Artie started me in a wellness program with his tribe, and he invited us after a month to go meet his teacher in Connecticut, who was the World Tai Chi Day, which he was in the one in Harlem this year. But he said, and I was the only one that went, and I got to meet his teacher. And after a year of finding out who his teacher was, he's like one of the most accomplished people, and he's learning. He was a martial artist, a champion, kickboxer, you know, karate and whatnot. And one time he saw this little Oriental guy on the beach. He went down to spar with him, and this guy cleaned his clock. He said, nobody can clean my clock like that. So he became his student. And this teacher was C.C. Ling, and C.C. Ling taught him through motion. After 5 years, Roosevelt Gainey learned that his teacher actually spoke English. He never told him this. When he ordered in a bar, he ordered a drink in English. He said, you speak English? But he was teaching him 6 hours a day for 12 years, actually. And he was teaching him a feminine technique that C.C. Ling had learned from his mother. Because his father used to beat him up. His father was Korean, and his mother was Chinese. And she taught her son how to defend himself by using a feminine technique of Qigong, which is great for the health. It's not just martial, it's for the health, primarily. And these were secrets he taught him that Chinese will not teach him. And so because he was prejudiced, people were prejudiced because he was a half-breed, he was half Korean and half Chinese, he taught his secrets to the black man, to get even with the Chinese and the Koreans for hating him. So these secrets that you can learn are now in Brooklyn. Roosevelt teaches in Coney Island on the weekends, in the park outside. He teaches in Bed-Stuy on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursdays, and Wednesday morning at a church in DePaul, in Brooklyn. And I've been studying with him for 2 years. And we can, and I want you, Greg said he'd have him here in in September or something like this. This guy is
The part 2, the Metaphysics Part 2.
Pardon?
Metaphysics 101, actually 102, that's in the fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm saying is, this guy, like, I couldn't throw a football more than 10 yards because I hurt myself. He gave me an exercise to do, which is somewhat of a limit. He says, yeah, do this, no problem. Sure enough, he was right. That was right after, I asked him that right after he showed me how to touch my toes. I couldn't touch my toes. I said to him, he says, there's nothing to do with it. He shows me a stretch. In 5 minutes, I can touch my toes. And teaches me how to run. He knows all functionality of the sports. It's not his specialty, but he knows every function of the human body. And he works on staff at the Brooklyn Hospital. It says energy work. His system is the Taoist system of living arts. And I set out on this path to study the Tao when I was a teenager. It took me 37 years to find a teacher, but he's teaching it to me in ways of health, in ways of, sure, you learn how to protect yourself, but this is the greatest gift I can give you is you guys can come to class if you want. You can, in Brooklyn, if you live nearby, it's easier. I come from Long Island. I go once a week. I was going all the time, but I realized I could do more practicing on my own, because you got to practice. Ideally, 10% of your day, 2.5 hours a day. And it's just really a wonderful thing. You can get your athletic skills back. I've watched some of the old timers at Old Timers Day that are not old, and I said they can't run to first base. It's sad that if they had doing some of these stretches, they were world-class athletes, and they don't have to do this. And in other words, you don't have, just because you're at a certain age doesn't mean you have to stop. In other words, if you've noticed, steroids have pushed athletes into their 40s, at least in baseball. Without steroids, they could be pushed infinitely, especially if they have the skill. So this is a great gift that you're all, and afterwards I'll be happy to answer your questions on that. Now, I'm going to, anybody have any more questions before we go on? Yes, Barbara.
I wanted to ask you about Ron Hubbard, because I read his book, Dianetics. I think I must have read it in the early 90s. And it resonated with me when I read the book. And I know it was like the late 90s when I made one of the meetings.
Right.
And I think I only made one meeting, and I knew that I didn't want to be there.
It's because it's all controlling and regulated. And it's all designed to control and regulate you and extract from you. And when that book was written, it was free. You do it on each other. And there was a big movement to do that in the 80s, and then it was cut short because they wanted to take everybody's name and regulate them, and it's like, enough, nobody wants this. They lose people by not doing what he said.
But it's not only that, because when that happened, like it was the late 90s, maybe 98, and I know at that point I was living in Queens, and since then I moved 3 times, and those people have tracked me.
Well, that becomes like it becomes like an intel operation. It's like, who wants that? Who even wants to be around an organization that does that? It's like, enough.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's money and it's control and it's manipulation. So it's like, there was, one of my friends calls my experience the Camelot of Scientology, because you could go in and do certain things, and you could do, and I can't answer for them or speak for them because I've had nothing to do with them for 27 years. So it's like, and I don't want anything to do with them. But, that's just a part of my history, and it was like, I was given a very brief moment in time where I could negotiate. That's kind of how I got here, and I'm glad I had the experience, but it took 12 years out of my life and doing it at the highest level. I wasn't,
But that's one of the questions I wanted to ask. I don't know if you could answer it, because you said you did better. I mean, is there anything you could share about what you actually done?
Well, I tell you, I told you I went out of my body, and not everybody has that experience. You see people that have been at 25, 30 years leaving very disaffected, saying, I never learned how to do this, Well, I would have been the last candidate to expect that I would have had that experience just by the way I was. But it happened. Because it had happened. I didn't want it. I didn't ask for it to happen. It happened. Maybe I was lucky.
But did you achieve that mental clarity that you talked
Yeah,
about? That's
a lot of mental clarity. But I'll tell you this about mental clarity. I got divorced 8 years ago. It was very unpleasant. And let me say that my wife and I, who had a wonderful relationship, at one point didn't have a very good relationship. But we still maintain contact because I still have to pay her and I have a daughter between us. And she was complaining to me about mental clarity. And, you know, maybe some menopause kicking in, and I said, well, why don't you start doing these Qigong exercises and start rolling a ball on your foot every night before you go to bed for 5 minutes, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, and you'll sleep better. And she was complaining of mental clarity, so I showed her the Qigong, and it took me a year to get her to class, and she comes to class once a week with me. We go together, and it makes the relationship quite good, and she's learning. You know, she's like, oh, I've got mental clarity now. Oh, this, that, wow, wow, wow. So you get your mental clarity with doing Qigong. And, you know, my teacher studied Dianetics in the 70s. He was also he was doing lectures at pyramids on scientists in the 70s. He was a natural healer before he learned this. He's got a lot of specialized knowledge himself, but you won't meet anyone who has more knowledge of the human anatomy. And she, by the way, you know, like, I've routinely seen him, you know, stop people in their tracks or knock them from 30 paces. This is chi thrown through his body. And he doesn't do it with anybody, he does it with his more advanced students. Because a normal person can't take the hit. It's a chi hit. So he's got great talent. And you can see it visibly demonstrated. And I would recommend you go this direction if you want mental clarity. There's a lot of therapies out there. Some of them work, some of them don't work, and some of them work for particular people. We all have a different path. But let me go into, this is something very interesting, and it's on a different thread. This is a brand new book. It's out a couple of weeks, Transylvanian Sunrise. And Transylvanian Sunrise, of course, it's an intriguing title because it has Transylvania. But it's not about vampires. You'll see there's a picture of a sphinx that's in Romania on the cover. And the reason I call it Transylvanian Sunrise, the book was called Enemy Within. This is not my book. This is added to by me. I write the introduction and 2 epilogues to the book because I actually went to the Sphinx. But in 1999, a man came to one of our monthly meetings in Montauk. I mean, not at Montauk, about Montauk. And his name was David Anderson, Dr. David Anderson, and he was a time travel scientist. And he had a time travel research center on Long Island. And he wanted to come and check out myself and Preston Nichols, my co-author. And he introduced himself, told me he had a time travel research center. I already had an idea who he was because he subscribed to my newsletter. And I didn't think he had a real time travel research center, but he actually did. In the Air Force, he was put on a project to figure out a space-time module, or what you call a example, module, you know, like let's figure out this problem. Because satellites in outer space were drifting several meters every year because they don't stay stable. So they wanted him to figure out a system, or help figure out a system, using his advanced knowledge of mathematics and physics to stabilize these things. So he used, for us laymen to say, used some of Einstein's theories and developed a way to warp space and time so as to maintain these satellites in their orbit. You're creating a self-contained field, okay? That it's maintaining them so that, you know, these things are expensive. They can't keep going down and shooting them up. So when he got out of the Air Force, he patented these mathematical formulas and developed the Time Travel Research Center. It was very advanced. The day after he came and saw us, he wanted to take me out to lunch. He took me out to lunch and showed me the business card of George Bush, who he just met the day before. George W. Bush, while he was running for office. You know, in 1999, he met him at the FBI building. He says, yeah, look who I met yesterday. Of course, we'd all heard of Bush. He was running for office. And so David had a lot of mysterious contacts in government circles. He was not in the government per se, but he became my friend. He put up my first website, and would come to meetings now and then. He was more interested in listening than he was in lecturing. I have a DVD here of him in his called Journeys into Time, talking about time travel in a scientific reference for the layman, which was designed to get investors into his research center. He had no trouble attracting investment money because he could actually parlay his knowledge of satellites into a self-contained field the size of a soccer ball that would slow or speed up time. Now, if you can slow down a heart or an organ, it's good for transplants. So the medical field was very interested in it, and he could demonstrate this knowledge. So David had this exciting company called the Time Travel Research Center, a big website. He wanted to do a museum on time travel. And he was very interested in my work because I'd written about time travel in the Montauk Project, and he liked my writing. So one day, but he was still kind of mysterious, and he called me to his apartment one night. It was an apartment that nobody had really ever been to in Kings Park, and he says, I want to talk to you for two reasons. One, I want to plan this big time travel event. We're going to have physicists from all over the East Coast come, and I want to promote your work, which was very nice of him to do. Because I don't get a lot of publicity or promotion because I'm very controversial. Without talking about the Moorish stuff, I'm controversial. Any which way. The Scientology is controversial because the Scientologists don't want to promote me because and the anti-Scientologists even less so. So I was very appreciative of him because he has a very strong scientific credentials, and he's open to my stuff. And he says, I want to do this event, but he says I was given a call last night. He says, I'm to report to Moscow. Once you're in the military, you're always in the military if they call you to service, and this was right after 9/11. It was in November after 9/11. He says, they say, bring your plane ticket and your passport. Don't bring anything else because you can't take it with you. Report to Moscow. So he says, I don't like the feeling of this, and they say I'm going to be gone 2 weeks, but if I don't come back in 2 weeks, would you please make a noise and make a fuss, and maybe they'll send me back. I said, sure. Then we got talking about China, and I told him about this Chinese Christmas card I once got from these publishers in China, and he says, I have a Christmas card from China. And he takes me over to his mantle. He's got a Christmas card from the president of China. And he's got all these Christmas cards from world leaders. Like they're his buddies, because he's an expert in nuclear weapons, so he, gets around the world. And so anyway, he goes away. He doesn't come back after 2 weeks, and I say, okay, 2 weeks, so what? Then I get a call after 3 weeks, and it's from his girlfriend. She says, David said to call you if I'm not back. And he's not back. So I start talking to her, and we agree to meet, and then I start making a lot of noise on the phone. I said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. Within 48 hours, he sent an email saying that he's okay. Somebody got word, and he sent the email from Pakistan. I had that traced to Pakistan through my friend Joe Matheny, and he could never admit that it was from Pakistan. Apparently, they were sending him over there something to do with the war with the Taliban, and for his expertise. And when I met his girlfriend, she says, he has a time travel research center? I didn't know that. She freaked out. She started reading. And of course, I'm still good friends with her to this day, although they're no longer together because he kind of had to protect her from his strange connections. When you can just have to go away for long periods of time, he's not a good candidate in that regard because he works for the company. But he then told me that he was having security problems in his center. He had security problems in his center, and the government said, look, if you partner with us, we'll get rid of your security problems, which they were obviously causing. He called me in Easter of 2003, around Easter time, before Easter, and he says, I want to give you all my stuff in the Time Travel Research Center, which was mostly a library. He says, I don't know what to do with it. I'm not going to use it. I'm out of the time travel business for right now. They've got this center in New Mexico, but he had to close one down on Long Island. He had one in Romania, which he said was because they have the best mathematicians in the world in Romania, and their economy was such that they were affordable, very affordable. So he said, I won't be able to work with you for 5 years. We loaded up Preston's van from his car with all these books in Rochester, New York, and we drove down back with them. And I didn't see him for 5 years. I get an email from him occasionally. Just a couple of mysterious postcards that were written in code. One that was written in code and one that he elaborated on. And he said, then 5 years to the day, he says, how would you like to go to Romania? We're having a conference. We're having a conference in Atlanticon, it's called. He'd been sponsoring this thing for years. It's scientists, writers, artists to help Romanian youth, science fiction writers. It's on an island in the Danube. He says, would you like to go? Now this was right after I'd signed a contract. He wrote me this to publish this book, which he put me in touch with some Romanian publishers, and my books got published in Romania. And they sent me a book in 2003, or thereabouts, maybe 2005. It was 2005. It took me 3 years to read the book because I'm very busy. When I read the book, I said, okay, I'll publish this. It took me 3 months to work out a contract with my publisher in Romania, and right after I worked this contract out, David says, do you want to go to Romania? I hadn't heard it for 5 years. I said, sure. So I go. And he calls me up on the phone and says, it's good to talk to you. It's been a long time. I look forward to having long talks with you on the Danube. We've never really had a long talk about some of this stuff. And I said, by the way, do you know the author of this book, Radu Cinema? I haven't told you what the book's about. He says, no, I don't. Oh, I know who you're talking about. I said, do you know him? He says, I don't want to talk about that on the phone. He said, the phone's a monitor. He says, we'll talk about that on the Danube. He says, no, he says, we'll talk about that on the Danube. So then, I get an email from Radu, which I still haven't told you what he works for Romanian intelligence. And he says, I want to come and talk to you in person in America. I'll feel safe talking to you in America. So he feels safe talking to me in America. David feels safe talking in Romania.
On an island.
Yeah, very funny. So let me tell you a little bit about how Radu Cinema is. Radu Cinema authored this book called The Enemy Within in Romania. And he was introduced by circumstances, I think he worked in the government already, to a man that's called Cesar Brad. And Cesar Brad was born with a very large umbilical cord. They couldn't cut it. And when the doctor couldn't cut it, he eventually did. I think he got a hacksaw or something, but it was very hard to cut. He reported this oddity to a certain part of the Romanian government, which was then communist. And he went to a special department. Cesar Brad was monitored, and he said to his parents, we will pay you so much money every month, but you have to report anything unusual that he does. The kid was very psychic, and they brought in a Dr. Zien, X-I-E-N, to monitor him. Dr. Zien was from Red China. He was part of a cultural exchange program between Red China, which was Red China at the time, and Romania. And they were both communist bloc countries. And in those days, any communist could go anywhere you wanted in the communist bloc. I was also told that you could go anywhere outside of the communist bloc. The only problem was you'd have 12 people following. This is what Romania is for. So anyway, Dr. Zien was monitoring him. He was very psychic, or not psychic, very gifted in these sort of things. Probably was psychic. So Caesar Brad grew up this strange youth. He was an anomaly. Gifted. As he grows up, they tell this book tells the story of his life to some extent. As he grows up, he becomes part of what's called Department Zero. There's a General Obadiah, or Colonel Obadiah, who becomes a general, who's over him. And Obadiah he helps secure funding for this department through a holding company in Uruguay. And he's some mysterious creatures here. And of course, the doctor, or Colonel Obadiah, has to negotiate around the dictator, because they have this Department Zero set up, which is like the X-Files department. They're there to study anomalies, because they've had people disappear in certain places of Romania, you know, your Bermuda Triangle effect and whatnot. So over the long haul, Caesar Brad, the psychic, grows up under General Obadiah, who oversees him. General Obadiah seems like a very good person, who is having to negotiate his way through the dictatorship and the eventual transfer of the dictatorship into a capitalistic system. And he's still there to this day. And Caesar grows up to be the head of Department Zero, okay? They have a unit come out and scrutinize these events and what happens, and then to send in a certain team, you know, to do certain things. So one day, Caesar is contacted through secret channels, diplomatic intelligence channels, that he's got to meet with this guy. And he's an Italian Freemason of noble lineage, whose name is Signor Mazzini. And Mazzini is, by Caesar's accounts, a very evil man. But he says to him, he's basically talking about how he works for the Bilderberger Group. He's very powerful. They can make or break economies. But they can't just bypass Romanian intelligence and Romanian presidency altogether. They need his help on something. He says, we need your help. Our people in the Pentagon have discovered through imaging technology, ground-penetrating radar, that underneath the Sphinx in Romania is a chamber that we can't get at. Because you're in charge of this, we want your help and your blessings, and in return we'll give you, anything the devil may grant you. Of course, Caesar does not like these people. He knows what they're up to, but he knows that he has to play along, because if he resists them, he'll be removed and Romania will suffer. So he kind of commits without committing. And the long and short of it is, and the guy says, don't talk about this to anybody. Don't tell the president. So they use this plasma technology to bore into. And this is all through his connections in the Secret Service of Romania. And he's telling this story to the author, Radu Cinamar. Meantime, he wants Radu Cinamar to publish this book. So he starts cluing him in on his life and all the stuff that happens. And they finally bore into this secret chamber underneath the Sphinx, because they saw it, and it's a room. How did it get inside the mountain? Because it's inside a mountain. It doesn't have an access point. And once they get there, the stuff hits the fan, because when they actually penetrate this chamber, it sends off a signal to a similar device that the Pentagon has already discovered off near Baghdad in Iraq, which would tell you that this is what the war in Iraq was really about. And it's a underground chamber that had a map in it showing the one in Romania going off. So they knew it was going off in Romania. So the Pentagon said, wow, this is going off in Romania. What's happening? Not the Pentagon, the US government, the army said, what's going on in Romania? So it gets to the president contacts the president of Romania, and they say, what the hell is going on? As they say, the stuff hits the fan. It's terrible. And there begins this intense fight between Romanian and American diplomats. Now, what you will see in the real world is you will now see, since that time when this happened in 2003, a convergence of Romania and American diplomacy. They're now buddies. Romania is now part of NATO. This has actually happened. They won't tell you that it's over this, but it is. Now, Radu Cinamar is invited to go see this chamber. by Caesar, because he wants the author to really see what's there. And it's only a few weeks after it's been found. That was in 2003. It's been explored for years, 6 years later. So Radu goes in there, and there's all these troops and stuff he goes by, and it's a mountain, a chamber in the mountain, and there's this, what you call, big table, 6 foot high. They have to go up on a platform to get it. He puts his hand over it. It would read out his DNA in a holographic projection. It could, if you put it further, it would read out up closer, molecules, atoms. He didn't have a whole lot of time to explore it because he was just for a dog and pony show. Another one, you could put your hand and it would show alien life forms, or combinations if you put your hands of alien life forms with human forms or with 2 alien forms. It would show the star system, what it's from, and it gave a holographic readout of a film of history that would be tailored to each individual up to 400 AD. After 400 AD it cut off, ostensibly because they haven't updated the software. So this is like a really bizarre thing. So when I went to Romania last year, David says, what do you want to see? I said, I want to see the Hall of Records. He writes it down. Not sure he knew what I was talking about. So he forwards my letter. So he says, write a letter to Radu. So I write a letter to Radu. I thought his people were going to get it, but it actually ends up going to my publisher. That's how they get to Radu, who only communicates to them by secret courier. And I get a letter from Radu saying, oh, I'm glad you're going to publish my book, da-da-da-da-da. I can't meet with you because there's too much security. I will come see you in America someday. Someday he will pop in on me. But it will be in America, he says. And this is an incredible story. And of course, I went over there to Romania. And because we're running out of time, I'll quickly get to the point. I went to Romania. I saw David. I hadn't seen him when I got to go to the Sphinx. This was an incredible experience. There's megaliths around there. A place called Babel. It's got these stones coming out. And this place is right underneath it. I was told that if you go a certain mile away from the Sphinx, you'll see all these Romanian military installations, but they'll send you back. I didn't try to penetrate their secret. But I got to meet David, and David was very nice. And he says, I'm not going to be able to talk to you much because I'm busy with this project, but I ate dinner with him and I talked. And finally, when it got down to the subject with Radu, he started avoiding me. David started avoiding me, and I eventually got sick, very sick, because I wasn't getting any information. My body was revolting. I wasn't intellectually sick. I was revolting, and so I spent a day away from the camp, and he spent the next afternoon with me and apologized. He says, I can't talk to you about some of these things because I have a merger going on. I'm going to get the Time Travel Research Center back. It's a new company called Anderson Multinational, which you can see on the web, Anderson Multinational. He doesn't play up the technology he's doing, but things are going better than ever. But I can't talk about it because I have mergers and deals on the line. I have verbal handshakes. He says, you can print this stuff, but that's about it, what I say. He later provided me with a little bit more information, but then I had an audio CD given to me by Radu, the author, that I was supposed to listen to. And I listened to it, and the first thing he says, don't let anybody hear this but yourself. And then he went on to talk about stuff that's already in the book. I didn't really learn anything new from the book until the end of the tape, and he says, there's only one person I want you to share it with, is David Anderson. I trust him, and I'd like to meet him someday. Because he read my newsletters, and so I went up to David and I said, Radu wants you to hear this CD. You're the only one he wants to hear it. I'll send you a copy when I get back home. And David said, it's funny. He says, many people have told me that I know Radu. He smiled. But he apparently doesn't know. So it's like this parallel connection. And I haven't really gotten a chance. I'm hoping to go back to Romania this summer. He re-invited me back, but they ran out of funds because of the economic hard times. So I'm trying to raise funds through my newsletter and whatnot to go back and visit a little bit more. But that's in a nutshell what this book is about. It turns out that Dr. Zen, it's mentioned in this book, although it's in a future book, there's 3 other books he's written, which are in Romanian I haven't even read. Dr. Zen is actually a Tibetan model that was posing as a red Chinese doctor. And it gets in, and actually, this is the funniest update, is he said that Caesar, he says, Reddy wrote me a letter and says, I'm sorry that Caesar is leaving me. He's going into the inner earth to be an ambassador. Because they found 3 tunnels in the chamber. One goes to Egypt, where he says there's a similar facility under the Sphinx. There's another facility in Baghdad, which I already talked about, and one goes to Tibet, and has a side tunnel to Mongolia. So Caesar has apparently left. He did get a copy of this book before he left, though, and Caesar acknowledged me. But it's interesting to have strange friends in strange places, and whether any of this stuff is even true, I cannot prove it. I would say, if I had to bet that it was true, I'd say it's mostly true. And it's a very interesting. This is kind of what my next few years of my life will probably be doing the sequels to this, which I don't have to write them, but I hope to add to them as I added to this book, writing the forward and afterwards. So that's, we're about at the,
We have about 5 minutes.
So if anybody, that's basically as much as I can squeeze in. I can actually give a 6-8 hour talk if my voice will hold out. I get enough information. But anybody have any questions?
I do. You know what I noticed? Because you have talked about ejaculation. Female ejaculation is a lost art. I noticed in Africa where they do the mutilations to the women, that's also a lost art. But that lost art is forced on these women in Africa. Can you?
Well, I haven't studied that. I've heard that they do this as a mutilation so as to prevent that sort of thing. Because although there is somebody had once reported that the only virgin births occurring were in black tribes of Africa. I've heard that. It's not substantiated, but it would stand to reason, and I think it probably has to do that to stop it from occurring. I would imagine.
To stop it from occurring, but you said it's an art. Because
not the mutilation.
No, not the mutilation.
But the cultivation.
Ejaculation.
Right, the cultivation of it.
But I noticed that it's forced on them in Africa, and what I want to know is, how did it get to Africa, and when did they start doing that in Africa? And was it really a black thing at first, or was that put there by another culture that came to that place?
Well, according to this one tradition, it would be from the Atlantean culture, but they could have been doing it on their own too, because you have a very rich, mysterious culture in Africa that goes into the Mero civilization of, what is that? I don't remember the country. It's south of Nubia. Does anybody know what the country? What's that? What's that? The Mero with the pyramids down there? What's that?
Oh, Monroe, it's my ancient Kosh. Ancient Kush.
Kush? Yes.
Yeah, Kosh is the real name, but the Western terminology is Kush. But Monroe was there, yeah.
Right. There's a lot of wisdom.
Which is apparent to ancient Kemet, much older.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom there that I couldn't pretend, to know which started first, the chicken or the egg. But there's just a very rich. You vote for the chicken? The egg might have been something else before it was a chicken. It was an egg. Yes.
While you were over in Romania, did they explain in any way, shape, or form how the time cycle was being changed for not only Romania, but also for the world?
They did not explain that. What I was told that as the conference would get deeper, David told me as it would get deeper into the week, it would have more to do with astropaleontology, which is stones and time, with stones lining up with stars, which has to do with the name of the conference, which is Atlanticron, which is time in Atlantis. The time of Atlantis, in other words, these stones will wake us up to the time to old Atlantean culture, and is coming back, kind of regenerating. And there's a huge set of stone that's what makes Stonehenge look Mickey Mouse by comparison. It's called Sarmisegetusa. This was the ancient Dacian capital, which has all these incredible calendar. That's where I hope to go this year. It's you can see it on the web. It's beautiful, but it's basically unknown, even by what you call your. My friend David Childress, he'd never heard of this place, and he's Mr. Archaeology, Mr. Forbidden Archaeology. So, you know, just that times are changing, not specifically how or when. Yes.
Was L. Ron Hubbard a high-ranking Freemason?
I don't think so. I've heard one or two rumors to that effect, but he had no.
Any ties to Elton Crowley?
He had studied Aleister Crowley. Yes, not. I mean, it's somebody he never met him. He studied with Jack Parsons, who was into Aleister Crowley. That's where not all, but most of his Crowley stuff comes from. And I wouldn't venture to say he was not a Freemason. In fact, I'm quite sure of it. Yes.
When did the Moors become Arab?
The Arabs, when Muhammad came, he invaded all of northern Africa, and everybody in northern Africa had to pay lip service to the Muslims, because if you didn't, you wouldn't survive. So the Berber people and the Moors adopted this culture, because if you didn't adopt the culture, you would die. So it was like you pay lip service. And, so that was in 700 AD, and it caught on like wildfire.
But they were still African. When did they become Arab? Arab-looking image.
I mean, it's an admixture. See, the one thing about the Moorish culture, and I first learned this in a movie called The Longships, with Sidney Poitier and Richard Widmark, is as I seen this as a kid, and I said, they make no distinction. The Moors have white people. Why is there no distinction? I didn't understand. And my father explained that they didn't care about color. The Moors didn't care about color. So it was a non-issue. And you have the Tuareg people, which are the blue race of today in the Sahara. They have tended to mix. They come from a blue queen, but they had white people. They're kind of an admixture now, a very beautiful admixture. But color was not an issue. Slaves could be white or black. Slaves existed in those days, but it wasn't a color issue. It was I guess, an economic issue. We just had a different attitude than we have today, or than 100 years ago.
When you mentioned the blueprints that just now, RH negative is copper-based blood?
Yes, RH negative. Well, originally was based upon copper-based.
So you would have iron. You have copper attracting oxygen into the blood.
It was originally the Martian race was supposed to be copper-based blood, and you see it in words like Coptic,
Right.
or Cheops. You have a root etymology. I mean, people that are RH negative don't have flagrantly copper-based blood, because they're originally. This shows up in something called Wilson's disease, which is the name Wilson coming in, which is too much copper. You're excreting too much copper through your liver. Your liver gets balled up.
Yeah, I think because humans are iron-based, and then I read that reptilian blood would be like a copper-based.
I don't know if it shows up in reptiles. It shows up in shellfish.
Shellfish.
Copper-based blood.
Put your hands together for Dr. Pierce.